everyone, and welcome back to Keep Calm and Mental Health On. I'm your host, Aditi Ediga, and today's episode, we're going to be joined by someone who is stirring up mental health conversations, literally. She's a baker, an author, and speaker, and she's a total powerhouse when it comes to using storytelling to advocate for mental health. Dayna, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. And also, that is such a sweet introduction. Like, I feel like I have to write that down or record it myself. Yes, thank you so much for having me. Again, my name is Dayna Altman, and as introduced, I'm an author, speaker, mental health advocate, entrepreneur. I'm the founder of Bake It Till You Make It, which is a community-based organization that uses food and baking to talk about mental health in a way that's authentic and vulnerable, but also fun and I guess a little bit easy too. Not so heavy. Just like being able to connect with others is something that has been so healing for me in my own mental health journey. So being able to provide that in any capacity is such a gift. And the way I've decided to pursue that is through my organization, Bake It Till You Make It. So I'm very excited to share more about the organization and yeah, just talk a little bit more about mental health. I think this podcast and any opportunity to share my story is something I'm always so grateful for. So really happy to be here.
Thank you so much. And then for our first question, I love starting off with something fun. So, what's your current favorite recipe to bake when you're feeling overwhelmed or you just need to ground yourself?
Yeah, what a great question. I think banana bread is always going to be my favorite. I love the idea that I can create a bread without it being like super overwhelming. It's really quick. I have the recipe memorized at this point. And there's just something about like being going back to a recipe that you know so well, that is really grounding when you're feeling overwhelmed. It's also I tend to always have the ingredients around the house. I feel like there's always bananas that are getting too ripe. So I love that it's very accessible for me as well. And that is kind of my go-to. I also feel especially connected to the specific recipe that I use because it's actually from a different mental health and baking organization called Abby's Bakery. And their banana bread in honor of Abby Wolf, who died by suicide in 2020, is such a special way for me to not only connect to my own work, but also in remembrance of her as well.
That sounds really nice. It's so amazing that you do that whenever you're feeling overwhelmed. I'm
Yeah.
not the best baker, but I do know that your brand, Bake It Till You Make It, blends food and mental health so beautifully, like you just touched upon a little bit. So, what really inspired you to connect both those worlds?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up without really a lot of like positive memories around food. I'm in eating disorder recovery and I probably struggle with an eating disorder for most of my life. And so growing up and not really having those like positive baking memories or cooking memories or having a favorite recipe, I would never, if I told my younger self this is what I would be doing, I would have had no idea that this is where my recovery has brought me in so many ways. What really started was the summer of 2017, actually right around this time. Bake It Till You Make It just had its like birthday on Monday. So it's very apropos to be talking about the beginning. I was really struggling in 2017 with a depressive episode. I was having trouble getting out of bed. My anxiety and OCD around my depression were really invasive, and it felt really difficult to do anything, let alone baking. Unfortunately, toward the end of that summer, so like the end of July, I was living at home and I got into a car accident. And so then I didn't have a car. So I was really stuck in for the four walls of my childhood home, and I had no idea how to spend my time or what to do. And I just started to bake really easy things like boxes of cake mixes, and just really early on saw the power and comfort that came with baking side by side with a friend who would come over, with a family member, talking about my depression while also standing side by side in the kitchen just felt a lot easier. It was a little bit more accessible. I felt more connected to the other person in a way. And right off the bat, I was like, wow, this is really special. Like, what a cool way to talk about mental health. And the more I started to think about it and work through the idea, I started thinking about how so many memories are and conversations are around food, around the table, like from as far back as you can remember, things were happening around the table. So this just felt like a really perfect excuse me. I was thought I was so funny that like I started to choke. I feel like that really it was inspiring for me. And it really I never knew that Bake It Till You Make It, or I guess right in the beginning was going to become this like larger organization. I always just imagined it was going to be a cookbook. That was the first kind of iteration of Bake It Till You Make It, a cookbook with recipes and other people, a collection of stories of resilience and mental health challenges and recovery. And then when the book came out in 2019, I really saw this demand for more conversations around Bake It Till You Make It. And that kind of inspired the presentations and events and what's made it what it is now. But originally it really stemmed from like that really difficult time and that book. And then it's since evolved. And I'm so grateful to now be able to run the organization and in a full-time capacity. So I'm very lucky and I love what I do. So that's really cool too.
Yeah, it sounds like baking has been a huge part of your healing journey. And, you talked about your cookbooks. So I know that they're more than just recipes and they have like real stories. So how is it like to share such a vulnerable piece of yourself on a page?
Yeah, what a good question. It is so I've unlike baking being like a kind of newer like 20s thing, I've always been a writer. Like I have always loved writing fiction stories, nonfiction journaling, like any opportunity. I remember going into my local Barnes and Noble as a kid and being like, I'm gonna have a book here. So that is not something that, oh my gosh, of course, sharing a vulnerable piece of my story, it was and continues to be a big challenge, but the idea of using writing as a mechanism to do that was something that felt really right to me. You're right. There are more than now I'm up to five Bake It Till You Make It books. Two of them are compilation books. So other people sharing their stories. I think over 40 people in each book, sharing a little bit about themselves. I also wrote an autobiography and I have two poetry books. And I think every time I do share more pieces of my story, it always feels scary because I'm always kind of pushing the line of like what feels safe for me to share. And the more work I do on myself in therapy and through Bake It Till You Make It and kind of connecting those dots, it always allows for even more ability for me to share in an authentic way. But it's definitely not easy. And I will say, the more I do it, it's like a muscle. The more I do it, the easier it gets. And I've also seen the power of being authentic, the way that has connected me with so many people that I love and respect and admire and know. It's really like vulnerability and authenticity are like contagious in the best way. So now that I've had like a little bit of a taste of that, like I just want to continue as much as possible.
Thank you for sharing that. And you've spoken at a lot of incredible places, including the White House. So, what did that moment mean to you, and how did it shape your perspective and on mental health and all the amazing work that you're doing?
Yeah. So thank you so much for asking. I've been speaking for a while, I feel like. But yeah, never at the level of the White House until 2022. Sharing my story in on stage has always been something that's been really important to me. And it's also a huge source of like I got really nervous because it means so much to me. So as you can imagine, speaking on the White House floor was very anxiety provoking, but also so incredible. It came about through the Youth Mental Health Action Forum, which was a collaborative project between the Biden-Harris administration and MTV, and they had selected 30 young mental health advocates to go to the White House and have this forum, this conversation. And of the 30, there were about like 8 people who were able to speak individually at the White House, and I was one of them. And it really was such a beautiful moment, not only for my present self, but also for my past and future, I guess, past self, because I never thought that in my darkest days, struggling with my mental health, that this was ever something I would be able to accomplish. And in terms of like for my future self, I also never took myself seriously as much as I did in that moment. And that really propelled me moving forward. It wasn't just like necessarily the accomplishment of getting to the White House and getting to speak, but also really recognizing like what it would look like if I actually believed in myself. And that was super powerful and has carried me into 2025 and hopefully beyond. That was definitely the most special speaking engagement. I would say a close second, though, would be at McLean Hospital's annual fundraiser, I guess. It used to be called annual dinner, but it's not called that anymore. And McLean is the number one psychiatric hospital in the country and a place that I spent a lot of time in my early 20s. And so being their speaker at their fundraiser this past year was an honor, especially because I was their first ever patient speaker, and other speakers included like Jane Fonda and Selena Gomez. And like now I get to say Dayna Altman too, which is really cool. So yeah.
Wow, those are two beautiful moments to, really see how far you've come. That's amazing. And, kind of turning into your advocacy and your impact a little more. You're a certified DBT educator and you've worked in both clinical and advocacy settings. So, I guess how does that background inform the way that you approach storytelling and educating people on mental health?
Yeah, that makes a lot of that. What a great question. I think that so my DBT educator and kind of like clinical experience really comes from after college. Right when I graduated from college, I thought I wanted to be a social worker or like a therapist, and I had some experience working at McLean where I was also treated and having the opportunity to be an educator there. I learned so much about DBT, and it's something that I still continue to think about and learn. And I also find some of my favorite speaking opportunities actually happen at the intersection of that advocacy and clinical work. I do speak at a lot of schools, and I love that so much, as well as being able to speak to individuals who are currently in treatment centers, or that can also be really powerful and is really special in its own way. I definitely am more on the advocacy side now, and especially as I share my own personal story of recovery when speaking. But I always love to pull out like the tangible skills and tools that I have learned and have been trained in, because I think that can be really helpful too. So definitely trying the baking metaphor to like mix and combine those things. Although I definitely feel like I'm more on the advocacy side in this moment.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And you've started a documentary and you've, founded body positivity projects. And
Oh.
so what do you think is one lesson that you've learned from creating meaningful change in health spaces? And like, how do you think that leading those projects has changed your view on the importance of safe spaces and healing spaces?
Yeah, well, I think that my the biggest lesson that I learned, I feel like I have two thoughts. The biggest lesson that I've learned over my entrepreneurial career and being an advocate, as you brought up, oh my gosh, you did your research. The beautiful project, my first advocacy project that I started with my sister, like over 10 years ago. So that throughout my career, I just wish every time I remembered sooner to just start. I feel like whenever I have a project idea, whether it be small, large, medium size, like I always feel like I have to have all the answers or I have to have all the ideas laid out perfectly. But if I did, even with like the books and everything, like if I waited till it was perfect or till it was organized, like I wouldn't have what I do. So that is something that I always like to share with anyone on the entrepreneurial side, or anyone who's, I guess, kind of struggling with like perfectionism or anxiety in any capacity. Like if you just, my first therapist, who I still adore, would always say like leap in the net will appear, which I know can sometimes sound like cliche, but it's so I've really like embodied that idea that like I'm just gonna go for it, and I am going to trust in myself, that I will continue to figure it out. In terms of taking those leaps and creating these spaces, yeah, I mean, I think it's so healing to recognize, not only recognize it, but to feel and embody the idea of not being alone. Like, I think when you say you're not alone, like I say that all the time in my presentations, but the idea to like actually feel that and be in community and embody that message, I think has been one of the most healing things for others, but also for myself in my own recovery journey, as I very much still struggle with my mental health. So I know that being a leader in those spaces has allowed me to recognize that I'm also not alone. And just like the impact of being around other people who like understand. I always thought until I started speaking like more regularly, I always thought that my story was like super unique. Of course, it's unique to me, but the more I have the opportunity to share it, the more I recognize that um, like there's so many people struggle and have adjacent struggles, and hearing about that and seeing oneself through another story, whether that be on film, like in the documentary, or through a presentation or book, I think that's invaluable.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's beautiful, how you emphasize community and how a lot of your projects surround that. So,
Yeah.
whether it's baking workshops or storytelling and just like kitchen conversations almost. So, why do you think it's really vital that you really lean on people to recover and have resilience? Because I know a lot of youth are really scared of reaching out to other people. So, how would you suggest they kind of go against their fear and really lean on their support circles more?
Yeah, it's so vulnerable to ask for help or to say that you're struggling. Like I understand that is so scary, and at the same time my current therapist, of course I'm bringing up my therapist, this is not surprising at all, would always say when I would worry about being a burden or like talk about what that would feel like, she would always say like, well, we're all burdens on each other, like that's just like part of being human. And I really love that, because at least that's very powerful for me, because that language around being burdensome or being too much or like needing too much was always something that I really struggled with. So the idea that like I'm kind of like, I'm human, welcome to the club, and other people are going to show up for me was really powerful. And I hope that resonates with someone listening. But I also recognize how scary that is. But kind of what I was saying in a little bit earlier, in terms of like the vulnerability and the authenticity being almost contagious, like you have no idea what sharing your story and what, asking for help can do. It can have such huge ripple effects, which is really powerful and special as well. I guess I just want to reiterate, like there are resources, there are supports, whether that's in schools, on college campuses, more generally, nationally. But I know how hard it is. And it's also, I think, important to remember how brave it is to ask for help and to take that first step, especially if you're not sure where that's going to lead.
Yeah,
So,
it's really important to realize. And, I love that you touched on, really like being vulnerable and how that's so important. And I know some young people really want to be vulnerable, and a lot of people I've talked to are worried that their stories aren't enough, and they kind of have a hard time figuring out the way to express themselves. They don't know what mediums. And since you have a lot of experience with baking and so many other things to express your mental health, how do you think that you would encourage other people to find their own little talent like that to help express their mental health?
yeah, first of all, I think what you brought up makes a lot of sense. I know that's something that I have felt like, oh, I haven't had it bad enough in order to share my story, or like I haven't been as severe. But I love the idea of like there's no comparison of misery. Like everyone has their own experience, and and it's not a comparison game. Like what is a big deal to you is a big deal to you, and that's it. Period, I guess. I think that can be helpful in finding the confidence and the courage to share. And yeah, for anyone who isn't sure maybe how they want to share, I would ask you to think about what you're passionate about. For me, that was like that has was and continues to be like my guiding light. Like, if is this something that makes me light up inside? And if so, I'm going to pursue that. And if you're not sure what that looks like, or maybe you're feeling depressed and you're not sure how to like access those interests, I think sometimes thinking about a time where you weren't feeling as heavy, or when the feelings weren't as heavy, or when you were feeling a little bit lighter, whether that was like childhood, a month ago, a week ago, what were you enjoying? And if that doesn't bring you anything either, I guess hoping and like connecting to the idea that like You have no idea. I love I guess it's a little bit different, but I love the quote, like, you haven't met all the people who are going to love you yet. I also want to say, like, you haven't experienced all of the things that you'll become passionate about yet either. And holding on to that, I think is really important, especially if nothing's like coming originally. And it's also okay to make it really outside of the box. I mean, who would have thought baking in mental health? But here we are. So whatever you're passionate about and whatever means something to you, that's enough. And I can't wait to see what you come up with.
Yeah, and I really love your use of quotes and how you always go back to your therapist and quote
Yeah.
them. So I just wanted to ask you, like, what's one quote or piece of advice that has really stuck with you and kind of like continues to kind of be that like little presence like in your everyday life. So yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So two. There's the first one is one that I've been using for years, and that is just like it's pretty simple, but it's just this idea like come hell or high water, like I will be okay. Because I am so consistently worried that like I won't be okay. Like there's something I haven't figured out yet. I haven't experienced yet, and that will be the thing that pushes me over the edge or like that I won't be able to handle. So remembering that like I will be okay. And that kind of I've heard like, you've lived 100% of your hardest days or like anything along those lines has been really helpful. But also, most recently, I had one of my therapists send me this quote that was like, if you want to make a difference in the world, you have to be different than the world. And that really like inspired me. I feel like on the one hand, it was really like it meant a lot that she saw that and thought of me because that is something that like so core to who I am. Like I am trying to make this difference. It is so important to me that I do. But also it's really hard. That's something that I struggle with a lot. Like wanting to be I don't know, no one's normal, but like wanting to fit in, I guess, and also standing out at the same time and how hard that can feel, and how isolating and lonely it can feel. I remember hearing that people in the C-suite of like executive offices, it's like when you get there, you can feel the most lonely. And I think that's something I've shared a lot about recently. Like the more successful I am, the more lonely I feel sometimes. So remembering that I want to make this difference, what my passion is, what my kind of North Star is, and recognizing that like these steps that I'm taking to be individually unique, both my personally and for Basically Make It is a step in changing the world like I want to. So those two I think I'm hanging on to in this moment.
Yeah, both of those are really beautiful. And so I just wanted to also ask, you are such a successful mental health advocate, but I do know that it can also be kind of hard to manage your advocacy while also honoring your own self-care. So how do you manage to do that?
Yeah, that's something that I'm definitely still working on. I think the best thing that has helped me is recognizing that my struggle, like I am my own brand and I can't run my brand or my organization or live my life if I'm not being honest with myself. And so I think when I've struggled in the past, I've been really nervous to share that and feel like, oh, like I'm struggling. How do I do this and run a business while also recognizing like I am the business, I am the organization, and I'm going to show up in a way that's authentic to me, which is very scary because I never want that to push anyone away or people not take me seriously. But it's also realistic. Something else that my therapist Dina says is like I'm sure you've heard a lot of people talk about like lived experience in the mental health world, and she always says living experience, which I love because at least for me like this is a lifelong journey. Like I am living my experience now in the future, and so I try and think about that a lot, and that's been a really good way for me to balance my advocacy. I also go to a lot of therapy. I take medication. I have a really wonderful husband and community of friends. I'm very lucky in that regard as well. I love to write. I love art. Um, I love going on my like indoor cycling bike. So there I've got some good tools, baking, of course, for self-care as well. But I think really honing in onto that honesty piece at the broader level has been really important for me.
Yeah, I really love the term living experience though. That was really
Yes.
amazing to hear. So looking forward though, so what is a dream project or any future recipe that you're hoping to tackle next?
Yeah, a great question. You are such a good podcast host. I do a lot of these and you're wonderful. I hope you know
Thank
that.
you.
Yes, of course. Well, I guess I'm really excited because this book, my current book that I'm working on, I am going through a pro what's the word? Traditional publishing process. In the past, I've self-published my book. So this is something super new for me and really exciting. I feel like this book like really has so much of my heart in it. As we were talking about earlier, like new levels of vulnerability for me as I've been working on it for so long. It's my memoir. It's called For All My Tears, Tiers, like cake tears, with cake recipes. And I hope that not only does that book get published, but also it becomes a play or a movie or also like the documentary that I created along with Swanito Media. That is something I'm always hoping will kind of have its limelight moment as well. We've had a lot of like wonderful success in the film festival circuit over the last year. But definitely like Netflix, Hulu, anyone who's listening, that is also a dream project. But I think any opportunity, I definitely have some places I'd really like to speak. I have a bake it till you make it bucket list. So and it just keeps getting longer. But I think any way I can create change, lasting change is like what I want to do. And I was gonna say that's the most important to me, period. It is. And I also have this dream of being on daytime TV. So I hope that happens too.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I hope that happens for you too.
Thank you.
And so, if someone is struggling right now, how would you, I guess, directly address the listener? And, like, what would you say to them just to like help them feel better and less alone?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would tell them that they're not alone. They are in great company. I know how isolating it feels like they're the only one who's ever felt the way that they are feeling, and that is so normal, and you're not alone. There are so many people who've experienced this and who live really full lives in spite of a mental health challenge or diagnosis. That's also something that's really important to me that I like to share is I've made a career out of my mental health journey, and that feels real to me. That's my purpose, but that doesn't have to be yours. Like for anyone listening who is like, I don't want a career speaking on mental health, like I want a career in another path. That's totally doable and wonderful and celebrated. And you look at any career path or any life path, that people struggle. I also just want to recognize that there are resources. So if you're not sure like where to start, if you're depending on where you are, colleges and high schools, middle schools, there's always hopefully support on campus, or finding someone that you trust to talk to. But if you're not sure where that is or you don't fall in those categories, 988, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is a great place to start, even just to get information. It is a crisis hotline, but you can call not in like a safety crisis and just have someone to listen, to learn more about resources in your community. NAMI also, the National Alliance on Mental Illness is wonderful. Mental Health America. There's so many. Yeah, I could name them all. So many amazing places to look for resources. So I guess the two kind of big things are you're not alone and there is help and support. And I'm not a clinician, but if anyone's ever looking for resources or just wants to an ear, like I'm always available as well, which I know isn't like a sustainable solution, but just knowing that like you're not alone, I think is helpful.
Yeah, that's really important to realize. And for the last question, what does "fake it till you make it" mean to you, like today, like in this moment?
Yeah, what a great question. That like makes me emotional. I guess make it till you make it is just like a promise to myself that like I will continue to focus and like fight for my purpose. Like make it till you make it is how I'm changing the world, and the rejection is plentiful. The difficulties are always there, but it's make it till make it is like my own internal promise to myself that like I believe in what I'm doing enough to block out the other noise and just keep focusing, knowing that the impact that I have, that's what it means to me. No one's ever asked me that before. You are a wonderful host. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for all of your vulnerability and honesty. They are truly contagious, I can tell you that. And you're really reminding people that their stories matter and that healing doesn't always have to be linear. It can be layered, sweet, and even
Yes.
messy, like our favorite recipes.
Yes.
And to everyone listening, if you want to follow Dayna's journey or check out any of her mental health cookbooks and projects, I will be linking those in the description. But until next time, keep calm and mental health on.
Thank you. Bye.